You really think a guy like you belongs near a car like this? The words cut through the polished air like a quiet insult dressed in a smile, and a few people nearby chuckled without even looking twice at the man they were laughing at. But Ethan Cole didn't respond, not with anger, not with pride, just with silence, the kind of silence that doesn't defend itself because it doesn't need to. As he stood beside the black sedan under the golden lights of the downtown hotel entrance, his worn boots leaving faint dust marks on marble floors that had never known struggle, his flannel shirt creased from a 12-hour shift, his hands still carrying the faint scent of motor oil and effort, and yet steady, always steady, while across from him stood a woman no one recognized, dressed simply, almost deliberately so, her posture composed but her eyes watching everything, calculating, measuring, as if the moment mattered more than it should, as if the man in front of her was not just another stranger passing through her carefully controlled world. "I'm just trying to help," Ethan said quietly, his voice low but firm, the kind of voice that didn't rise to be heard but somehow carried anyway. And the valet scoffed, shaking his head as he reached for the door handle. "We've got professionals for that, sir." 3 quick words, sharp, dismissive, practiced, followed by 2 slow seconds where the night seemed to hold its breath, the distant hum of traffic, the soft echo of heels against pavement, the flicker of headlights reflecting across polished chrome, and then one silent truth settling into the space between them. Ethan wasn't supposed to be here, not in their eyes, not in their world. But the woman, she didn't move, she didn't correct them, she didn't reveal anything. Instead she watched him, watched the way he stepped back without argument, the way he wiped his hands on an old cloth and gave a small nod as if respect was something he carried inside him, not something granted by others. "Your car's overheating," he added after a pause, not to prove a point, not to win, just because it was true, and truth had a way of finding its voice in him even when everything else stayed quiet. The valet hesitated for a fraction of a second, unsure now, but pride filled the gap quickly. "We'll handle it," he replied, sharper this time, louder, as if volume could erase doubt. And again a ripple of soft laughter moved through the small crowd gathered near the entrance. People dressed in tailored suits and evening dresses, holding conversations that floated above reality. Conversations that never had to touch the ground where men like Ethan lived. But Ethan didn't look at them, didn't let the noise reach him, because somewhere beyond the lights and the judgment and the invisible lines drawn between people, there was something else guiding him, something quieter, stronger, a sense of dignity that didn't ask for permission to exist. And the woman finally spoke. Just one sentence, calm, controlled, almost gentle. "Let him take a look," she said. And the valet blinked, surprised, uncertain. The balance of power shifting ever so slightly in a space no one else noticed. Except Ethan, who met her eyes for the briefest moment, not with gratitude, not with curiosity, but with something far rarer, recognition, as if he understood that this moment, this small interruption in an ordinary night, was the beginning of something neither of them had planned, and no one there, not the valet, not the guests, not even the city itself, had any idea that the man they had just laughed at was about to give away everything he had for a woman whose truth would leave them all. Without words, the engine clicked once, then twice, a dry metallic hesitation that most people would have ignored, but Ethan did not. He leaned in slightly, eyes narrowing not with suspicion but with focus, listening the way a man listens when experience speaks louder than appearances. "Turn it again," he said calmly, and the valet hesitated, glancing toward the woman as if waiting for permission. "Do it," she replied softly, and this time there was no laughter, just a faint shift in posture from the people. Nearby, curiosity replacing amusement as the key turned and the engine struggled before settling into an uneven hum. 3 short sounds, irregular, restrained, followed by a low vibration that carried through the frame of the car and into Ethan's fingertips. He stepped back slowly, wiped his hands once more, then crouched just enough to glance beneath the front edge. 2 quiet seconds of stillness, the kind that stretches when someone is about to say something that matters. And then one simple truth. Cooling system is off balance, probably a loose line or a pressure leak. It will stall again if you keep driving it like this. His voice did not rise, did not demand attention, but it held it. "Anyway," the valet frowned now, unsure whether to dismiss or listen, while the woman watched Ethan with a different kind of focus, not on the car, but on him, on the way he spoke without trying to impress, the way he stayed grounded even while standing in a place that clearly did not belong to his world. "Can you fix it?" she asked, direct, no hesitation, and Ethan paused, not because he did not know the answer, but because he understood the cost behind it. 3 quick thoughts moved through his mind: the late hour, the tools he did not have with him, the long drive back home where a small apartment waited with a dim kitchen light and a daughter who would already be asleep. Then 2 slower realizations settled in. The car would not make it far, and the woman, for all her composure, had no one else willing to step outside their role to help her. And finally, one quiet decision. "Yes, but not here," he said, standing up, meeting her eyes just long enough to make sure she understood. "I would need to take a look somewhere with proper tools." The valet scoffed again, though softer this time, less certain. "And you expect her to trust you with that?" he asked, folding his arms as if the answer was obvious. But Ethan did not respond to him. He never did. Instead, he simply waited, hands at his sides, posture steady, offering nothing but honesty, the kind that does not come with guarantees. And the woman took a small breath, barely noticeable, as if weighing something far beyond the moment, something deeper than a broken car or a stranger's offer. "What is your name?" she asked, and the question seemed to shift the air again, subtle but real, as if identity suddenly mattered. "Ethan," he replied. Just that. No last name, no explanation, and she nodded once. "Ethan," she repeated quietly, as if testing the sound of it, committing it to memory. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and without looking away from him said, "I will have the car brought to wherever you need." A few people exchanged glances now. The tone had changed, the balance had shifted, but Ethan did not smile, did not react beyond a small nod, because for him this was never about opportunity. It was about doing what was right in front of him, even when no one else saw the value in it. And as the car was prepared to be moved, as the valet stepped back with a forced politeness, as the crowd slowly returned to their conversations, something unspoken lingered between Ethan and the woman, something neither of them named, a quiet recognition that this moment, simple on the surface, carried the weight of something far greater, something that would ask more of him than he had planned to give, and he had no idea yet just how much everything would cost. The garage smelled like old metal, warm oil, and quiet persistence, the kind of place that never needed to prove its worth because every dented tool and every worn surface already had. And as the black sedan rolled slowly inside under the flickering overhead lights, it looked almost out of place, too polished, too precise, like something that belonged in a different world entirely. Ethan stepped forward without ceremony, wiping his hands on a faded cloth before circling the car once. Not rushed, not impressed, just observant. 3 quick glances at the hood line, the tire pressure, the faint residue near the front grille, then 2 slower steps as he reached for the latch and lifted the hood, letting the faint heat rise into the air between them, and one quiet conclusion forming in his mind before he even spoke. "It is worse than I thought," he said evenly, not dramatic, just honest. The woman stood a few feet away, her posture composed, but her attention locked on him, not on the car, not on the surroundings, but on the way he worked, the way he moved without hesitation, without trying to impress. "How long?" she asked, and her voice carried something new now, not authority, not distance, but a subtle edge of concern. Ethan leaned in, adjusting a loose connection with careful precision. "A few hours if I had everything I needed, maybe longer if parts are damaged." 3 short sentences, practical, grounded, followed by 2 quiet seconds where the ticking of cooling metal filled the space, the soft hum of a distant highway drifting through the open garage door, and then one truth that hung heavier than the rest. "And it will not be cheap," he added, not as a warning, not as a negotiation, just as fact. The woman did not flinch, did not reach for her wallet, did not ask for a number. Instead, she stepped closer, just enough to see what he saw, just enough to understand the problem without pretending to fix it, she said simply, and the words were not a command, they were a decision. Ethan nodded once, then paused, because something else pressed at the edge of his thoughts now, something beyond the engine, Beyond the job, 3 quick images crossed his mind. A small kitchen table with a single lamp still on, a school paper left unfinished, a promise made earlier that day. "I will be home early tonight," he had said, and 2 slower realizations settled in. This would not be early, and this would not be simple, and one quiet conflict formed in the space between what he owed and what he had just agreed to. He stepped back slightly, closing the hood halfway before looking at her. "Again, I will need to stay late for this," he said, his voice still calm, but carrying something deeper now, something personal, not explained, not justified, just present. She studied him for a moment, her eyes sharper now, searching not for skill but for something else, something harder to define. "Then stay," she replied, and again, no hesitation, no negotiation, just certainty. But Ethan did not move right away, because for him, staying was never just about time, it was about cost, and cost was something he understood better than most. The silence stretched briefly, filled with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of passing cars, until finally he reached for his tools, setting them down one by one with deliberate care, as if each motion was part of a decision already made. "All right," he said, and that single word carried more weight than anyone there realized, because in that moment, without knowing who she truly was, without knowing what this night would take from him, Ethan chose to give something he could not easily get back, and the woman watched him do it, not interrupting, not revealing anything, just observing the kind of man who gives before he asks. And somewhere beneath the quiet rhythm of metal and motion, something shifted, something neither of them could yet name, but both would soon have to face. The minutes stretched into hours without announcement, the kind of time that does not move in numbers, but in quiet sacrifices. And inside the small garage the world narrowed to the rhythm of Ethan's hands, steady, precise, deliberate. 3 quick turns of a wrench, a soft metallic click, a measured exhale, followed by 2 slower movements as he adjusted the pressure line and checked the seal again. The hum of the engine rising and falling like a question waiting for the right answer, and one quiet truth forming with each passing moment. This was not just a repair anymore. It was a commitment he had already chosen to carry through. The woman remained nearby, not pacing, not interrupting, just watching, her presence calm but attentive, as if she was studying something far more important than a mechanical fix. "You do not rush," she said after a long silence, her voice low, almost reflective. And Ethan did not look up right away, tightening one final bolt before responding. "Rushing costs more in the end." 3 simple words, grounded, certain, followed by 2 seconds where the faint buzz of the overhead light filled the space between them, and one deeper meaning that lingered beneath his tone, not just about the car, but about everything he had learned the hard way. She nodded slightly, as if she understood more than she let on, but before she could say anything else, the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the stillness. Headlights cutting through the open garage door, and a man in a tailored coat stepped out, his shoes too clean for the gravel beneath them, his expression already edged with impatience. "Victoria," he called, sharp but controlled, and Ethan paused for the first time, not because of the interruption, but because of the name, the way it was spoken with familiarity and expectation. The woman did not turn immediately. She simply closed the distance between herself and the workbench by a small step, as if choosing her position carefully before responding. "I am here," she said, calm, unchanged, and the man approached quickly, his eyes scanning the space, then landing on Ethan with a brief, dismissive glance. "What is this?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before continuing. "We have been looking for you. The board meeting is delayed. The investors are asking questions." 3 statements, rapid, controlled, edged with urgency, followed by 2 slower seconds where his gaze returned to Ethan, taking in the worn clothes, the oil-stained hands, the setting itself, and one quiet judgment, settling into his posture. "And you are," he added, not out of curiosity, but out of habit. Ethan stood up slowly, wiping his hands once more, not defensive, not apologetic, just present, just fixing the car, he replied, and the simplicity of it seemed to irritate the man more than anything else. "We can have this handled elsewhere," the man said, turning back to the woman, his tone firm, practiced. "There is no need for this." But she did not move, did not agree. Instead, she looked at Ethan. For a brief moment. Then back at the man. He is already handling it, she said. And the shift was subtle but undeniable. 3 words that carried authority without raising volume. Followed by 2 seconds of silence where the man's expression tightened, recalculating, and one realization beginning to surface. He was not in control of this moment. Not entirely. Fine, he said finally, exhaling through a controlled smile. But do not take too long. And with that he stepped back toward the car, pulling out his phone, already returning to a world of schedules and expectations. While inside the garage, something quieter remained, something heavier. Ethan glanced once at the woman, not asking, not assuming, but noticing. The name, the urgency, the difference between who she appeared to be and who the world seemed to expect her to be. And yet he said nothing, because dignity does not demand explanations. It waits for truth to reveal itself. And as he returned to the engine, tightening the final connection, one thing became clear in the silence between them. Whatever this situation truly was, it was far bigger than a broken car, and he had already stepped into it without knowing the cost. The engine settled into a smoother rhythm at last, not perfect, but stable, the kind of stability that comes from careful attention rather than quick fixes, and Ethan stepped back slightly, listening, always listening. 3 short pulses of sound, consistent now, followed by 2 slower breaths as he wiped his hands and let the quiet fill the space again. And one quiet confirmation forming in his mind, it would hold, at least for now. It should run, he said simply, his voice carrying no pride, no expectation, just truth. The woman stood a few feet away, her gaze steady, but there was something different now, something less guarded. You stayed, she said, not as a question, not even as gratitude, but as an observation that seemed to carry more weight than it should. Ethan shrugged lightly, not dismissive, just honest. I said I would. 3 words, unadorned, followed by 2 seconds of silence where the faint ticking of cooling metal echoed through the garage, and one deeper layer. Beneath it all, a man who does not break his word even when no one is watching. She stepped closer now, not into his space, but near enough to see the details others would miss, the worn edges of his tools, the small crack in his watch face, the way his hands moved with care even when the work was done. Most people would have left, she said quietly, and Ethan gave a small nod, not an agreement, but an understanding. Most people have somewhere else they would rather be, he replied, and the words carried no bitterness, just fact, but something in them lingered, something that made her pause, because for the first time she saw not just what he was doing, but what he was giving up to do it. 3 quick realizations moved behind her eyes: the late hour, the empty garage, the absence of anyone waiting with him, followed by 2 slower thoughts that settled deeper. This was not convenience for him, and this was not obligation, and one quiet question formed, unspoken but present. Why would someone choose this without knowing what they would receive in return? She looked at him differently now, not as a stranger, not as a service, but as something harder to define, something rare. You have a family? She asked, her tone softer, careful, and Ethan hesitated for just a moment, not because the answer was difficult, but because it mattered. A daughter, he said, and something in his voice shifted, just slightly, almost invisible, but real. 3 words, simple, followed by 2 seconds where his gaze moved briefly toward the open garage door, as if measuring distance in more than miles, and one quiet truth settling beneath it. He was not supposed to still be here. She noticed it. Of course she did. The way he checked the time without looking at his watch, the way his shoulders held a weight that had nothing to do with the car. She is waiting for you, she said, not accusing, not assuming, just stating what had become obvious. Ethan nodded once, slow, steady. She always does. And there was no complaint in it, no regret, just a quiet acceptance that spoke louder than anything else. The woman lowered her gaze for a moment, as if something inside her had shifted, something she had not expected to feel. And when she looked back up, her voice carried something new, something closer to respect than anything before. Then you should go, she said. But Ethan did not move, not right away. Because for him, leaving was never just about walking away. It was about finishing what he started, and as the engine continued its steady hum, as the night stretched quietly around them. One thing became clear in the stillness between them. This was no longer just about a repaired car. It was about a man who gave without asking, and a woman who was beginning to understand the cost of that kind of quiet dignity. The words lingered in the air longer than either of them expected. Not loud, not dramatic, just quietly undeniable. "Then you should go," she had said. And for a moment it seemed like the night itself paused to see what he would choose. Ethan stood there with his hands resting lightly on the edge of the workbench, not tense, not uncertain, just thinking. 3 quick thoughts moved through him again. The promise he made that morning, the dim light in the apartment window, the small voice that always asked if he would be home for dinner, followed by 2 slower realizations that settled deeper. He had already stayed longer than he should have, and leaving now would mean walking away before everything was truly finished, and one quiet decision forming beneath it all, the kind that does not ask for approval. "It is not done yet," he said finally, his voice calm but firm, and she studied him carefully, as if measuring the meaning behind those simple words. "You said it would run," she replied, not challenging him, just clarifying, and Ethan gave a small nod. "It will," he said, "but it will not last if I leave it like this." 3 sentences, steady, grounded, followed by 2 seconds of silence where the low hum of the engine filled the space between them, and one deeper truth beneath his tone. He was not the kind of man who left things halfway, no matter the cost. She exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if something inside her had shifted again, something she did not expect to feel. "What do you need?" she asked, and this time the question carried no distance, no hesitation, just sincerity. Ethan glanced at the open hood, then toward the shelf where his limited tools sat in quiet order. "Parts one do not have here," he answered, "and time." The last word hung slightly heavier than the rest, because both of them understood what it meant. Time was not just minutes. It was something being taken from somewhere else, somewhere more important. She nodded once, absorbing it, then reached for her phone, already moving to solve the problem the way she always did, quickly, efficiently, without friction. "I can have anything delivered within the hour," she said, and for a brief moment, the difference between their worlds became visible. Again, 3 quick assumptions behind her offer: speed, access, control, followed by 2 slower realizations that softened her expression. He had not asked for any of that, and he had not expected it either, and one quiet recognition settling between them. This was not about what she could provide. It was about what he was willing to give. Ethan shook his head slightly, not dismissing her help, just redirecting it. "It is not about getting it fast," he said. "It is about getting it right." His voice still even, still grounded, and something in those words made her pause, because they did not just apply to the car, they applied to everything she had been trying to manage that night. The meeting, the investors, the pressure waiting outside that garage, all of it built on speed, on urgency, on never stopping long enough to question the direction. And here stood a man who refused to move forward unless it was done properly, no matter what it cost him. She lowered her phone slowly, letting the silence return, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between them, something neither of them named but both understood. Ethan turned back to the engine, reaching for his tools again, his movements deliberate, committed, and as he did, the night stretched further than it was supposed to, the clock moving quietly past the hour he should have already been gone, and somewhere miles away, a small apartment remained lit just a little longer than usual, waiting, always waiting. While inside the garage, a man continued to give more than he could afford, not because he had to, not because anyone asked him to, but because that was who he was, and the woman standing nearby began to understand that this was not just kindness, it was sacrifice, the kind that changes everything once it is seen clearly enough. The night deepened without asking permission, the kind of quiet that settles slowly until it feels heavier than sound itself, and inside the garage the work continued with the same steady rhythm. 3 measured turns of a wrench, a soft adjustment, a brief pause to listen, followed by 2 slower breaths, as Ethan stepped back again, checking the alignment with the patience of someone who understood that small mistakes grow louder over time, and one quiet realization settling into the space between effort and exhaustion. This was taking longer than he had planned, longer than he had allowed for, but he did not stop. He never did. The woman remained there, closer now than before, not watching from a distance anymore, but standing within the quiet orbit of his work. Her presence no longer separate from the moment, but part of it. "You are still here," she said softly, almost to herself, and Ethan did not look up this time. His focus fixed on the final connection he was securing. "So are you," he replied, and the simplicity of it carried something unexpected, a reflection she had not prepared for. 3 quick thoughts crossed her mind: the meeting she had left behind, the messages waiting unanswered, the expectations pressing just outside the walls of this garage, followed by 2 slower realizations that settled deeper. She had chosen to stay, and she had not explained why. And one quiet truth emerging beneath it all: she did not want to leave. Not yet. Not before she understood what made this man different from everyone else she had ever met. The engine hummed again, stronger now, steadier, the sound no longer uncertain but confident, and Ethan finally stepped back fully, lowering his tools onto the bench with deliberate care. "It is done," he said, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice, no condition attached, just completion. The woman glanced toward the car, then back at him, as if the result mattered less than the process that had led to it. "And you stayed for all of it," she said, and there was something in her tone now that had not been there before, not just observation, not just curiosity, but something closer to respect, real and unguarded. Ethan gave a small nod, his expression unchanged. "I do not leave things unfinished." 3 words, quiet, certain, followed by 2 seconds of silence where the weight of that statement settled into the space between them, and one deeper meaning beneath it. A man who carries responsibility even when no one asks him to. The sound of footsteps approached again from outside, quicker. This time, sharper, and the same man in the tailored coat returned, his expression tighter, his patience thinner. "Victoria, we need to go now," he said, not loud, but firm enough to cut through the calm that had formed inside. And for the first time, Ethan noticed the shift clearly, not just in her name, but in the way it was spoken, the urgency, the expectation, the authority wrapped inside it. She turned slightly, acknowledging the call without stepping away. "It is handled," she replied, her voice steady, controlled, but something in it had changed, something quieter, more grounded than before. The man glanced at Ethan again, this time longer, as if trying to understand what had happened here, what he had missed, but he said nothing, because some things do not explain themselves in words. They reveal themselves in presence. Ethan wiped his hands one last time, stepping back from the car completely now, his role finished, his part done, and for a moment the space between them held something unspoken, something suspended, 3 quick possibilities lingering in the silence: a thank you, a question, a revelation, followed by 2 slower breaths where neither of them moved, and one quiet ending to the moment as it was, not dramatic, not loud, just still. "You should go," he said finally, echoing her earlier words, not as a dismissal, not as distance, but as truth, and she looked at him, really looked this time, as if trying to memorize something she could not yet name. Because somewhere deep inside, she understood that this night was not over, not really. It was only the beginning of something that would return, something that would demand more than either of them had planned. And as she turned to leave, as the world outside waited to pull her back into its rhythm, one thing remained behind in that quiet garage: a man who had given everything he had in that moment without knowing who she truly was, and a silence that had not yet revealed its full weight. Morning arrived without ceremony, pale light slipping through the thin curtains of a small apartment that still held the quiet weight of a night that had gone on too long, and Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, not tired in the way most people would notice, but carrying something deeper, the kind of exhaustion that comes from giving more than planned. 3 soft creaks of the wooden floor beneath his boots, a gentle exhale, a glance toward the kitchen table where a small plate sat untouched, followed by 2 slower steps as he moved toward the couch, and one quiet realization settling in his chest: he had missed it, again. His daughter stirred slightly from where she had fallen asleep with a book in her lap, her hair falling loosely across her face, and when she opened her eyes, there was no anger, no complaint, just a small, sleepy smile. "You are late," she said softly, and Ethan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair back with careful fingers. "I know," he replied, his voice low, steady, carrying more than the words themselves. 3 simple words, followed by 2 seconds of silence where the room held its breath, and one deeper truth beneath it. He had chosen something else over this moment, even if it had been for the right reasons. She nodded, not asking why, not needing an explanation, because children understand more than they say, and sometimes more than adults expect. "Did you fix it?" she asked, her voice still soft with sleep, and Ethan gave a small nod. "Yes," he said, and something in that answer seemed to settle her. As if the world made sense again when things were finished properly, she leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, closing her eyes once more, trusting him without question, and for a moment, the quiet of the apartment felt heavier than anything he had faced the night before, because this was where his choices mattered most. Hours later, the city had already moved on, traffic humming, offices filling, conversations stacking on top of one another in fast, controlled layers, and far across downtown. Inside a glass building that reflected the morning sun like a mirror of power, the same woman stood. At the head of a long conference table, her presence commanding without effort, her posture sharp, composed, and entirely different from the quiet figure who had stood in that garage. "We proceed," she said, her voice calm, decisive, and the room responded instantly. People straightening, pens moving, attention locking into place. 3 quick reports delivered, numbers, projections, expectations, followed by 2 slower pauses as she listened without interruption, and one quiet truth sitting beneath it all. None of it had held her attention the way that night had. The man from earlier stood near the far end of the table, watching her carefully, as if trying to measure something that no longer fit his understanding. "You disappeared," he said after a moment, not accusatory, but curious, and she did not respond immediately, her gaze shifting briefly toward the window where the city stretched endlessly below. "I needed to see something clearly," she replied, and the answer seemed simple, but it carried more weight than anyone in that room could understand. Because somewhere between the polished floors and the quiet dignity of a man who asked for nothing, she had seen something her world had long forgotten, something that could not be bought, rushed, or controlled. And as the meeting continued, as decisions were made and plans moved forward, one thought remained steady in her mind, not loud, not urgent, but certain. She would go back, because some truths, once seen, do not let you walk away from them. And somewhere across the city, a man who had given everything without knowing who she truly was had no idea that the silence he left behind was about to return, stronger, clearer, and impossible to ignore. The afternoon light stretched long across the concrete floor of the garage, turning dust into something almost golden, and Ethan stood near the workbench with the same quiet focus he always carried, sorting through tools that had already seen more years than most people noticed. 3 soft clinks of metal meeting metal, a measured breath, a small adjustment to a worn handle, followed by 2 slower movements as he set everything back into place, and one quiet sense of order returning to a space that never asked for recognition, only consistency. The sound of engines outside grew louder, not 1, not 2, but many, a low, synchronized hum that did not belong to the usual rhythm of that street. And Ethan paused, not out of alarm, but curiosity, his eyes lifting toward the open garage door just as the first black vehicle rolled to a stop. Then another, each one polished, precise, deliberate, forming a line that did not ask for attention but commanded it anyway. 3 doors opened in near unison, controlled, coordinated, followed by 2 seconds where even the air seemed to still, and one undeniable shift settling into the moment. This was not ordinary. The man from the night before stepped out first, his expression no longer impatient but composed, almost formal, and then she followed, not the quiet woman from the garage, but something else entirely, something the world recognized instantly, her posture sharper, her presence undeniable, every step measured with the kind of confidence that does not need to prove itself. And yet her eyes, when they found Ethan, carried something unchanged, something that had nothing to do with power. "Ethan," she said, his name clear, steady, and for a moment the space between them held both versions of her at once. the woman who had stood quietly beside him, and the one who now stood at the center of something far larger. He did not step forward, did not react beyond a small nod, because recognition does not always come with surprise when a man has nothing to gain from it. "Your car is running fine," he replied. Simple, direct. 3 words that cut through the spectacle around them, followed by 2 seconds of silence where no one else spoke, and one quiet truth beginning to unfold. This moment was not about the car. She took a step closer, just enough to close the distance without breaking the balance between them. "I know," she said softly. And then, without turning, without raising her voice, she added, "And now they know who I am." The words moved through the small crowd that had begun to gather, through the staff who had stepped outside, through the man who now stood slightly behind her, no longer leading but observing. 3 quick realizations rippled outward: CEO, power, identity, followed by 2 slower shifts in posture, respect replacing assumption.